every interaction you have with a human being really truly matters. And I just have a way of kind of making sure that the people I'm interacting with feel heard, and they feel valued, and I want to understand everyone's worth, and I want to understand what they bring to the table. And that's obviously a good skill to have in the classroom just as much as it is in
Yeah.
the office. You really want to make sure that people know that you're listening to them, that you're seeing them. You don't want to skip the step of, like, if you disagree with them,
Hmm.
a perspective, a conversation you're having, you want to make sure that you hear them out and you really understand, if you do disagree with them, what their stance is, because everyone's eager to get across what they believe and why they believe that way. But if you skip the step of really connecting with the human being in front of you, you miss out on so much of the impact that I believe we can have in school environments.
Hey, welcome back to the Tech Ed Clubhouse podcast. Today, I am joined by a good friend of mine I met through FETC down in Florida, Dr. Mark Zeiler. He's an educational and ed tech leader with over 20 years of experience across the K-12 system as not only a teacher, a media specialist, and an administrator. And he focuses on building some human-centered systems where trust, clarity, and shared ownership drive improvement, especially around AI, and supports people instead of overwhelming them. Mark, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about your journey and kind of what you're doing right now, what you're focused on.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here with you, Dan. And obviously, it was really cool, the conversations we were having at FETC and that we've carried on. Yeah, so I'm really excited just to leverage my experiences in K-12 education, from the classroom side of things, from the administration side of things, and also from the ed tech side of things as a media specialist. And the times that we're in. So before I get into anything else, I got a haircut the other day. I went to the barber. She's cutting my hair, and she said, "Oh yeah, Adam, who used to cut hair here for us, he's opening his own business." I'm like, "That's cool. What's he doing?" Well, he's doing a pressure washing business, and that kind of, like, I pressure wash, once in a while because we get a lot of algae and all that stuff. That's hard work. Like, it's a good day's work. And I was like, "Yeah, that's hard work." And she's like, "No, not really. He programs his drone, and the drone goes around and pressure washes the roof and the side of the house." I was like, "Excuse me?" And I Googled it immediately after the haircut, and this is a thing where we have drones flying around. Like, so when we were at FETC, we marveled over the St. Valley, the student led
Yeah.
drone show, and we were like, "Wow, that was amazing." Well, drones are doing a lot of different things. So that was kind of an AI moment for me, thinking about, like, man, like, is there going to come a point where I'm going to come into this barbershop and you know, uh, I don't know, a robot is cutting my hair?
You never know anymore. You never know with things and stuff like that. But and where first of all, where are you? First of all, if
Yeah,
they can
so
pressure
I'm in
wash,
Florida.
uh, you
Yeah,
know,
the two main school districts I've worked in, Orange County Public Schools.
it's a
Yeah,
small one, right?
that's a big one. We had over 200 schools and
Yeah.
almost 200,000 kids. And the last one I worked at is in Brevard, also a very large school district. So yeah, I've had
Those are
the pleasure of working in two of the larger school districts, not just in Florida, but Orange County
yeah.
was one of the largest, top 10 in the United States. So I've just been in that kind of environment where it's just big. There's just a lot of human beings, a lot of
Yeah.
students, a lot of adults, and how it feels like being in the classroom. So anyway, one comment I hear from leaders is like, "Oh man, the further up the ladder you go, the lonelier it feels." But sometimes people remember how lonely it can feel in a classroom, like being on
Mhm.
that classroom island. And depending on the layout of the school, if you're working at a brick and mortar, you might be really close to some of the classrooms right next door or the hallway, but it's really easy to feel disconnected and to literally not know the names of some of the teachers on the other side of campus. And even if you do know their names, it's really common not to see them very often during the course of a school day or a school week. So it's hard to foster that sense of connection on a consistent basis, on a meaningful basis. So a lot of leaders, like I told myself when I went into school administration, don't forget it. Like, don't forget what it feels like to be a teacher in a classroom. And I do believe some leaders do lose touch. And Dan,
Yeah.
I also think about how different life is since COVID. You know what I mean? Like for anyone who taught before COVID, absolutely, you have my respect. And teaching is not easy, any year, any day, any school. But, COVID really tangibly changed the way that teaching and leading felt. And so, yeah, having those experiences that we have, I believe helps us connect more with, the people that we're having conversations with.
Yeah. And being in a big school district, like how many high schools did they have?
Oh gosh, so I'm thinking in Brevard, I want to say somewhere around 20, maybe
And that's
20,
a lot.
25.
I mean, because up here in New York State, we're each school district its own little separate entity. We work through a central resource center, kind of some regional stuff. But like, my school was 1,200 kids, K to 12,
Yes.
with maybe 200 professional staff. So you
Yeah,
get that. So a lot of those things that like you're talking about there as a small school district, we take for granted, right? So, as an administrator in one of those bigger districts in down there in Florida, how did you create some community?
well, for me, I just kind of operate from a human lens. I know not everybody is built that way,
Right?
but that's just kind of how I was raised. I really attribute a lot of that to my father. He just had a way of connecting with every human being in his path or her path, his path. And I guess when I was younger, it felt a little awkward at times because
Mhm.
he would always strike up conversations with anybody and everybody, every walk of life. But I think as I got older, I came to really appreciate the value in that approach and that skill and that kind of way of being. So I think to answer your question to start, I'm kind of myself.
Yep.
I kind of model the fact that every interaction you have with a human being really truly matters. And I just have a way of kind of making sure that the people I'm interacting with feel heard, and they feel valued and they feel like themselves. Like I want to understand everyone's worth and I want to understand what they bring to the table. And that's obviously a good skill to have in the classroom just as much as it is in
Yeah.
the office. Like you really want to make sure that people know that you're listening to them, that you're seeing them. You don't want to skip the step of like if you disagree with them,
Hmm.
a perspective, a conversation you're having. You want to make sure that you hear them out and you really understand if you do disagree with them, what their stance is, because everyone's eager to get across what they believe and why they believe that way. But if you skip the step of really connecting with the human being in front of you, you miss out on so much of the impact that I believe we can have in school environments.
Absolutely. I mean, that's goes back to the basics, right? I mean, that's just sometimes we don't see the forest for the trees, right? I think that's how the saying goes. Something like that. I was a shop teacher, so take
But
that for what it's worth.
man,
Um,
but Dan, that's legendary though. Like
right.
seriously, the shop environment, like to me, you foster the conditions that kids feel connected to. And not only that, the kids remember. And that's why you and I were kind of talking a little bit earlier that like everyone always recognizes you when you're out and about. There's a
Yeah.
reason for that, because you saw them and you developed relationships with them and you fostered those conditions where they can come in and be themselves and also explore, build, collaborate, connect. That's so incredibly important. And we
Yeah.
don't always see that in the core courses, the four cores.
Yeah, because it's so tough. It's so tough. And as administrator, when you were on that side of the desk, did you find it a little bit difficult because like kids would come and see you because Mrs. Johnson in the English room said, sent Steve down to see you because he was being a jerk in class. And that's the only time the kids might see you.
Yeah. So on the discipline side, I was in a dean role, an assistant principal
Hmm.
dean role for 5 years, including during the time during COVID. And yes, it was hard. We were at a school. It was very interesting. It had a Cambridge program, a lot of really sharp, gifted kids that brought a lot to the table, that had a lot of ambition. But we also had another section of the school that, were not in those advanced level classes, that maybe didn't feel as connected to that side of the community. And yeah, when they're coming to you and you feel like it always starts out with a conflict, and
Yeah,
you're just bouncing off of one conflict to another, it is very difficult to stay connected to the reason why you showed up in the building to begin with. But what I found interesting about those relationships is the more often you saw those students that were having those kinds of troubles, the more, the deeper the connections got. Whereas the first few phone calls home, maybe a little more adversarial, a little more
sure.
confrontational. But as we had to send kids home for various reasons, different discipline infractions, and you have those really hard conversations when the parents are in the building, you really strengthen those relationships during the conferences. Not all conferences went well, trust me, but I
That
guess
is
what I'm
true.
trying to get across is I actually valued those interactions just as much as a positive call home or a positive interaction in the hallway, because I knew like these weren't bad kids. That they were good human beings that made choices, where they have to face those consequences, and we have to learn those lessons. But that's where, again, I think schools are more important than ever, that leaders and educators are more important than ever, because when kids are going through a difficult time and they don't, going back to that example of getting kicked out of a class, when they don't feel like they're welcome in that classroom, or when they feel like that teacher isn't really seeing them for who they are and what they bring to the table. Yeah, those are hard conversations. And then you circle back to the teacher, and you try to make it this sort of this collaborative circle
Hmm.
where, like, hey, I spoke to so and so came into the office today, these were the concerns that they shared, what's going on, and the teacher will give you, of course, a complete 180 of what really happened in the classroom. The truth may be a little bit more
Some
toward the teacher
little.
side of things than the student, because the student will try to dig their way out of trouble. But at the end of the day, both versions matter, and you have to kind of filter the reality of what happened for whatever it was. And even if you don't arrive at 100% of the truth, I think for me, the hope was just that each of them saw each other a little clearer, and that you can help, strengthen that relationship for when they go back into the classroom. Again, a lot of what I'm talking about doesn't happen in a week,
No.
doesn't happen in a semester. But interestingly, over time, the kids that you saw the most, man, you get to the point where you see them in the morning, like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
How you feeling today? You ready to go? Like, hey, when you get into math class today, send the right signals. Like, be there on time, because that sends the right message. And then when the teacher starts their lesson, make sure that you're tuned in, and that way I won't see you in the office later.
And it's those little things like that. Sometimes it's just that hello when they walk in the door, to not only
That's
to the
huge.
kid, but to the teacher too. I mean, but to your staff coming in as the dean of students, right? You got to balance that, because, you know, so many times we hear, and again, I was spoiled. I didn't have this issue, but you send little Stevie out of the room. He comes see Dr. Mark up in the office, and you're like, you give him a little pat on the head and a sucker, and you send him back to class, right? And so many
Yeah.
times, especially in a bigger district like you were in, right? So many times that can just get swept under the rug, so to speak, because you just have so much on your plate to deal with, and you got to make, because a discipline thing and you can maybe elaborate on this a little bit, but that discipline piece that that teacher thinks might take 5-10 minutes might literally take you an hour to deal with by the time you do all your paperwork and call home, right? I mean, so there's a lot that teachers don't see behind the commitment that you're making as an administrator.
You make a good point there, because I know you and I see eye to eye
Hmm.
on a lot of the compliance driven problems in education, because So
Yeah,
much of the traditional system, especially, is compliance driven, and it definitely is not connection driven. And it's easy for you and I to sit here and say, hey man, when you're in that classroom, you got to connect with that kid, or when you're in that office and a kid comes to you, make sure to connect with the kid.
absolutely.
Yeah, but the compliance really does require a lot of time and attention. And so from the teacher side, I distinctly remember wondering, as an English language arts teacher, and I didn't send a whole lot of kids to the office, but when I did, I distinctly remember wondering, like, how in the world is that kid back in my classroom after what happened yesterday? And I shared that information with the administration, and I didn't hear anything from the administration, but they're back in my class. Like, how did that happen? So as an administrator, it was much easier to understand for me, like why we couldn't, drop the hammer on every kid with every problem that's reported to us. Because on the compliance side of things, yeah, the district's watching very closely the quantity of referrals. That's
Hmm.
data that's being watched very closely. We're looking at the different ethnicities that are in our building, and making sure that equity is being served, that every kid is getting an opportunity at an equal education. Like, those are all conversations that are happening. So what I did try to do as an administrator, whatever the consequence was, and as I got further along, like there was very clear guidelines about, okay, if this particular infraction happens, this is generally the consequence that you have to choose from. If
Sure.
the if the infraction happens a second time, this would be a consequence to choose from. A third time, so and so. So generally speaking, the consequences got heavier as the infractions increased in frequency. But what I would try to do is communicate with teachers. Hey, listen, I read your referral. I understand you're fired up about what happened here. When I was in the classroom and a student said or did that to me, you and I are on the same page with that. Here's
Absolutely.
the conversation I had with the child. If I was able to contact the parent, this is what I was able to relay to the parent. And this is what we're going to do going forward. And I'm going to have check-ins with so and so, like if I see them in the hallway, and I'm going to reinforce the positive behavior. So I hope that this is the end of it. I hope you guys can forge a stronger relationship. But if you have any other trouble, by all means, like, don't hesitate to contact me or to send the kid to the office if it's too disruptive for your classroom.
Yeah, because you gotta make that connection. I mean, you and I, like you said, you and I have this very similar philosophy and similar thought pattern when it comes to this stuff, and just going kind of stepping away from the discipline piece, just the
Yeah,
connection piece in general, right? Between
yeah,
staff and admin, between teachers and administration, between teachers and student, administration and student, student to student, right?
yeah,
We got what are some things that you did that you tried to do in your administrative role and maybe even as a teacher too to
yeah.
build
Well,
those relationships? What are some
yeah.
because I'm sure there's somebody out there going, I wish I could do that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to start by saying this because we both know that compliance is necessary, but it's also really challenging to overcome when it comes to connection. So, one thing I do believe is, regardless of how we're redesigning systems, systems really do need to be embedded with that connective human, like collaborative tissue. There needs to be that in any kind of system, because it's easy to have a system and to communicate it. And even if you have clarity on what the system is, if there isn't the human element that's driving the implementation of it, it's not going to work. So going back to that example, when I was at a school called Rockledge High School. It was COVID. Real, like, I don't even know how to put into words what we were seeing and experiencing as a school community, as a society. Everything was different. There was
Mhm.
that distinct sense that whatever's going on right now, there's really no going back. And we really
Yeah.
did never go back to pre-COVID. But one answer to your question, one thing I did do in that moment as things got really challenging, what I looked around and I saw that there really wasn't a lot of positive recognition happening across any stakeholder group. It was really just one conflict after another. I'd be bouncing off of conflicts with parents, with kids, even with teachers that I highly respect to this day. We would have disagreements about decisions that had to be made to support the school and the students. And so there was there was an idea that I had. I'm like, hey, listen, we've got to come up with a systematic way to recognize each other for the good things that are happening across our school community. And I just sat down, I kind of mapped something out, and I went to my principal and I said, this is an idea I've got. We were called Rockledge High School. So I said, I'm going to call it Rock Positivity. This is how it's going to look, and this is what I'm going to do. And at the time, I created a Google form. The way that I was able to do it, where whether you were trying to recognize a student, a support staff, a teacher,
Mhm.
an administrator, whatever it is, you were able to click into there and talk about who you wanted to recognize, why you wanted to recognize them, what the positive input was. And so at a faculty meeting, I was like, hey, listen, we're at a point. Obviously, we're all feeling a lot of pressure right now. We're all feeling something different. What I'm offering here is an opportunity for us to reconnect in a meaningful way. And I think for us to do that, we need to remind each other that in this school building at all times, great things are happening. And so instead of all of our conversations being about all the negative things that are happening, let's start revisiting some of the reasons why we're here as educators and leaders. And let's start remembering that for every one challenge we're dealing with, there's literally 100 good things going on. And
Yep.
we called it Rock Positivity. And so that is in play to this day at that school. And it, little by little, it gained traction. And I started having a student of the week, a support staff of the week,
Yeah.
a teacher of the week, and I went in there and I took pictures myself. One thing about me that's kind of funny, I used to be a yearbook teacher when I was teaching English language arts,
Hmm.
and I transitioned into this media specialist role. And the principal was like, "Hey, listen, we really need a journalism teacher, a yearbook teacher. I don't know, we haven't been able to find one. You willing to do that?" So when I dove into journalism, I learned about things like the rule of thirds. I'm actually a really good picture taker. So back to the story, I would go around campus and I would take those pictures with the students, the teachers, the support staff, and for every student of the week, I'd have positive conversations with the parents. I'd call the kid in, I'd give them a certificate, we take that picture, and I'd be like,
Yeah.
"All right, it's time to have that phone call," and we talk to the parent on speaker. Like,
Yeah.
hey, listen, it's Dr. Z calling, and the reason I'm calling you, and the kid's like, the parent like, oh, great, here we go. What is it this time? I'll tell you what it is this time. Something great. Mr. Quintal, the algebra teacher, told me that so and so did a really great job on the lesson, put really great effort into it, and this is the result. The student of the week. That changed the culture of the school, and we actually saw that in the survey input we get. One of my gripes about this the culture surveys, and another funny thing about every year it's something different, right? It's
Yeah.
never the same target. It's always a different. But my gripe about it is we only see once a year what this insight data is telling us about
Mhm.
culture. You can't measure culture once a year. And even if you could, just like a standardized test at the end of the year, we get this information at the end of the year.
Yeah.
No, man, we need
What are
more
we gonna do with it?
informative assessment and understanding of what's happening in front of us. But bottom line is, we saw really great changes in the school culture where people were communicating differently with each other, and everything wasn't such a fight. It felt better. It looked better. It was, yeah. So that was something positive I was able to offer to the school community. And you met me, Dan, and I think I was drawn to you for many of the reasons that some people say they're drawn to me. It's because
Yeah.
we see people for who they are, and we don't try to change anyone. We just bring ourselves and we invite them to share themselves with us. And I think that's true with the way that we interact with adults, and that's true with the way that we interact with students.
And thinking about too what you just said about the student of the week or the staff member of the week or whatever it is. A lot of times, and I'm just thinking back to my own experiences. Who always gets the recognition at the school, right? I mean, who's getting all the pats on the back at the school, right? It's probably the academically high achieving kid, the athletic kid who's the quarterback or the point guard on the basketball team or the soccer player, whatever it is, right? That's the kid
100%.
that's getting it. Or on the flip side of that, You got the kid that's always in trouble. But there's so many kids in the middle of that. And there's so many teachers that might not be doing work that is, going to make them teacher of the year,
You're
right?
right. Yeah.
But they're doing solid work. I mean, like you said, you got teachers that are doing some amazing things. And I always try, whenever I go to conferences and I get to talk to teachers, there's so many teachers doing some amazing things in their little silos.
And that's, yeah. And I
Yeah,
know the silo issue is,
still there.
I mean, yeah, you and I can talk it to death. There's just so much value and collaboration there across the school building, and yet it's obvious to say that out loud. But the
Yes.
challenge is creating the conditions. How do you create the systems, the
Mhm.
processes, the conditions? So we do try things like collaboration calendars, and they do add some value. If you schedule some regular meetings and people start seeing each other on a regular basis. But again, department meetings, instructional leadership meetings, academic focus groups, things like
Teachers are
that.
busy.
Yeah, it is a lot
Teachers are
of
busy.
busyness. It is a
Teachers
lot
are
of
busy,
busyness.
and there's always a new initiative coming down. But I just had it, and I'm sure you listened to it. And if you listeners haven't, go back a couple episodes. I interviewed Stevie Frank
Oh, she's
from
wonderful.
Zionsville, Indiana, and a couple episodes before that, kind of along these same lines. The best PD might be that teacher that teaches next door, right? And I also
Always
talked.
is.
I always talk,
It
and I
always
also
is.
talk to and this one might fit with kind of what you're doing, because a couple episodes ago I had Curtis Hewson from Jigsaw Learning up there in Western Canada on my show, with a new book he's got coming out here. I think it's coming out in May. He said May of 26. But talking about just these things like what do you have in place already that's fostering some of these connections, because we're people, right? And
Yeah.
teachers are a special group of people, and administrators and educators are all, not everybody can play that game. Like I tell my wife
Yeah.
too, I can't go, I can't play the corporate game. I can't go into a business and do KPIs and metrics and all this stuff. Now I can do data and I can do test scores. I suppose that's the same thing ish, same idea. But right, we got 100 different personalities walking through the door at any given day, and I'm sure you saw a bunch more down there with that. So and so you got
Well,
some
that's
great
just
stuff going on, right?
yeah, and that's so important to think about. And I don't think enough people understand. So in the ed tech world, the way I see things, I feel like ed tech founders and co-founders, and you got the directors of
Mhm.
marketing and customer success. All these people work so hard. They're so committed to their product. They
Absolutely.
they will bend over backwards to help schools successfully implement this platform. But what's forgotten on the school side of things is when this platform is adopted, so many breakdowns can happen in communication between the procurement and then the district office, and then finally it's in schools. I mean, literally just this last school year, a really wonderful science platform showed up for middle school kids. That's a great solution. And our district was having issues with that middle school science assessment. And I believe it
Mhm.
can help with the cure. But it was 2 months into the school year before I even knew it was there. It was at a curriculum meeting 2 months into the school year, which isn't very helpful when it comes to professional learning, like
Right.
preparing the teachers to implement the curriculum, and then also to share it with the students. To gain some agency with the students about, hey, we've got this platform coming down the pipeline here. It's really just to help you guys make more
Yeah.
connections to our content, and it's personalized and it's gamified. It's all these great features. And then I actually had a great relationship with the customer success manager of that platform. And the more I dove into it, I was just so impressed. And I had the CEO message me and just say, hey, is there anything more I can do? I know you spoke with so and so. Like, do you need
Right.
anything else? We're here to help. We're here to make sure that that platform is successful in your school. But yeah, the human element. You mentioned the personalities.
Yeah.
And just one example of that is there are administrators that have different comfort levels with technology integration,
Hmm.
just as there are teachers that have different comfort levels with technology integration. So you bring in a great platform like this, there may be three or four teachers that are just on top of the tech game that take it and run with it,
Right.
just as there might be three or four teachers that are like, you know what, I'm set my ways. I feel good about how I, approach my curriculum.
Right.
I'm good without it.
Right. And they're both probably getting similar results. And that's the thing
Right.
too, that a lot of people don't, that you have to think about is, we're talking about that human side of it. You said, you might have 20 high schools down there in one of your counties. In each of those high schools implementing this science curriculum, the implementation is going to be 20 different implementations.
100%.
You know what I mean? So it's not like, hey, we're going to buy this platform and it's going to revolutionize X, Y, and Z. And it might, but in Dr. Z's class, it's going to run a little bit different than in my class. And then in my high school, I got different kids that have different experiences. And if you don't know those things, if you don't make those connections, some of that just kind of gets lost in the mud.
It's so interesting that you said that because, there are a lot of conversations happening right now with ed tech in schools about this idea of outcome based
Yeah.
contracting, like making some ties and promises about, okay, if we don't deliver these results, then we don't get this money. Like that's a really hard
That's big.
conversation because
That's big.
yeah, because I mean, look, if I'm paying for a gym membership and the gym is telling me, look, if you come in, I've got everything lined up for you. I can get you in shape.
Hmm.
If you're looking to do some strength training, it's all right there. All you have to do is walk in the door. We have the same problem in schools and classrooms. We have the, chronic attendance issues. We've got a lot of social emotional challenges that we deal with students to support. So it's not just academic. Sometimes it's just being there. It's being in the classroom. It's
Right.
being well enough to focus. Is this student fed? Is this student cared for? Is
Yeah.
this student?
Yeah. Like you said, it's just sometimes showing up is the win.
Yeah,
Like, and going back to what we talked about earlier, saying hi to the kid on the way in the door. It,
yeah,
just showing
yeah.
some compassion or interest or friendship to a kid that
Man,
might not get it at home. Because I'm sure, and this, we can beat this horse, like you said, but if you find out, if you know the kid and something happened, right? You know what's going on outside of the school for the other, quick math in my head, 18 hours of the day. I don't know if it's pretty close.
yeah,
That kid comes to school, might be the only safe place he's got, but you got to talk to that kid and get to know him. And again, spoiled in the special areas, like when you were in your media place in your yearbook, right? It's a little bit different than being in a core four, because I can have
yeah.
those little conversations, and I can go over and say, hey, how you doing? What's going on here with your project? Hey, did you win your baseball game last night? Hey, how was your band concert? Right. And it's those little things
I love it. I love it.
that we
That
talk
reminded me
about.
of when I was teaching English language arts. A lot of times when kids were very candid in their writing, they would say certain things. It would, a little alarm
Yeah.
bell goes off, or you want to check in with a kid, you want to check in with the parent. Like I remember doing a lot of that. And recently when I was supporting some middle school math scores, and we made a lot of growth in middle school math, and one of my strategies was relationships with the kids. And it
Yeah.
turned out that one of the eighth grade math teachers was also the basketball coach.
It
So I would
helps.
actually go to the basketball practice, and I would get an idea of who in that classroom was, on the basketball team, have those conversations. And then when I would bring them into my office to do a little data chat with them, like, hey, this is where you are, and I'd call the parent. It's all of like it's a community feel.
Hmm.
So I had the pleasure of going to the Kennedy Space Center today with my son, and something struck me. So I was on this tour bus. We take the tour bus there. As we're getting on this tour bus, this guy, the driver, he's
Hmm.
like, "Hey, I'm Dale. How are you?" And
Yeah.
I was having a sidebar conversation with my son, and I was like, "Hey, Landon," Landon, how are you? And he's talking to my 5-year-old like they've known each other for years, and it made my son feel more comfortable. I was real excited to get onto the bus, and
Right.
he did that same thing with every person that got onto that bus. He treated him or her the same way,
But it's got to
and
be real.
yeah, and it
You
was.
can't
And then
fake
on
it.
the
I
way
mean,
back, after they dropped us off at one of the facilities and came back, a different driver didn't even say hi when we got on the bus. And I'm sure they worked just as hard, but it was
oh,
just a
sure.
different feel, and it was
Yeah.
a different experience. Teachers are the same way,
Yeah.
you know.
You go into another classroom and you got the same kid in a different classroom. Like I didn't have discipline problems. You probably didn't have a lot of discipline problems or engagement problems
And
because you're
there are often
connected.
those questions. Like in
Yeah.
the teacher lounge, the teacher's like, "I'm struggling with Mark." Well, that's weird because when he's in my class, he's great. And what's the difference? Well, I mean, there could be some of the behaviors, but a lot of
Right.
it could be the way that we're interacting with the child. We do have to think about that.
So is that kind of along these lines? And this isn't just another thing we have in common. I think this is really kind of how we met was connecting through the human intelligence movement with Dr. Amat.
Yes, Dr. Ament, and yeah, it's such a great group. Arvin Ross is amazing.
Yes.
You know,
And again, I'll put a link to that in the show notes for anybody that wants to get involved with that. But what's your involvement with the human intelligence movement? And what are they kind of about?
well,
If you can
a lot
synopsis
of
it.
this, and Dr. Ament is probably the most passionate human being about humans I've ever met. It's about
She's awesome.
protecting. Yeah, I mean, it's really about protecting the humans behind the technology.
Yeah.
With the acceleration of AI, we want to make sure that humans are leading the technology into the future and not the other way around. So there's a lot of that focus and a lot of driving conversations like those, with things like webinars, like you and I are going to help lead tomorrow, and we do member mingles, we do podcasts. Dr. Ament and Arvin Ross are absolutely amazing with the Unscripted Intelligence podcast.
Yep.
And
Put
I
it
think
to
a
that.
lot of it's just conversations,
Yep.
like we're having now, to bring attention to the skills, the leadership, the teaching, the relationships, all the things that go into fostering things like curiosity and imagination and critical thinking. And you know I to me I love so much of what AI is bringing us in terms of opportunity. This is like one of the most incredible opportunities
Yeah.
in mankind's history, but I'm also terrified at the thought of humans. Like, I guess what I'm trying to communicate here is the ability to think is at
Yes.
stake, but
Yes.
also the ability to connect is at stake. Because one thing that I've observed through the research that I've read, the conversations that I've had, just observations I've made, ironically, the more digitally connected we are, oftentimes there's that inverse relationship
Mhm.
between how relationally connected we feel.
Yeah.
And that's something that has to be hit head on with intentionality in terms of the design of the conditions that you foster in your classroom and your school, the culture that you establish. Because if we just connect and we count on that technology to lead us into the future, where are we going to be?
And for not for nothing, but that technology could open the door to meeting some cool people. That's how I got to, that's how you and
Absolutely.
I hooked up, right? And I've
Yeah.
met, as I'm sure you have, I've been introduced to a ton of hundreds of awesome people that without technology I wouldn't have met.
So,
But we alluded back at the beginning of we first met, face to face at the FETC conference down in Orlando. And if you've ever been to a conference like that, you know, there's the best part about those conferences are when you sit at the table and have your lunch or over a beverage at some point in an after party, and have these conversations because there's so many different inputs. And I tell people when I go to conferences and I speak, and I'm sure you're the same way, I tell them I'm selfish when I go and present. And they're like, why are you selfish? I'm like, I because I learned something, right? I don't do it because I want to talk to people, right? And I'm sure you don't go in because you think, there's some things I got to say, but I'm
Right.
selfish because I want to make that connection to people. And it's
Uh,
amazing how small the world is,
that is so
right?
true.
Right? I was in
That is, I mean,
Michigan. I was in Michigan last week at the McCool conference. I always say it wrong. And I was talking to this art teacher. And I go, yeah, I'm from New York State. She goes, oh, you must know Tim Needles, right?
oh,
Who I'm a good friend with, who is an amazing educator out on Long Island. But I mean, it just goes that goes back to like the joke. We joke about it at my house that there's nowhere we can go where we don't know somebody. But that's
exactly.
awesome because you
Yeah.
feel connected. And I
Yeah.
think that's what we're doing with the human intelligence movement. I think that's what Dr. Ament's doing with that human intelligence movement is bringing that critical thinking, which are the skills that our kids need. Because knowledge, right? And fostering that communication. So I just kind of sorry I went on
No, not at
there.
all. And
So
I'd say something that really strikes me about the human intelligence movement is you get this sense that you've found your people.
yeah,
Like you're talking to real human beings that are, not just the real deal, but they're focused on the real things in classrooms and in society. And it's something, yeah, just like you, I'm really passionate about supporting that mission of making sure that we keep humans at the center of everything we do. And gosh, Dan, like I think of things like, I saw this little clip of I think was it Russia's New Year's celebration where all these robots are dancing? It was a country different than ours, but I saw these basically humanoids dancing. They look just like people,
right.
and just thinking about with Tesla and all the effort they're going to put into building these
Mhm.
humanoids, and they have factories for this set up, and there's going to get to a point where we're producing 1 million of these a year or whatever it is. uh, it, I, we're moving toward this place where is a humanoid going to be on, when we go to the grocery store, are they going to be picking out groceries for someone at home? Whatever's happening, people have to be the ones making the real decisions.
Right.
And it does feel like it's kind of like our last stand to make sure that people are the ones that create the future.
Yeah. And that's
Because if
what
we give everything away, and robots are driving for us, and they're grocery shopping for us, and they're cutting our hair for us, like, and they're pressure washing our roof, like, what are what are we doing?
right.
Like, what is our role? So the
Yeah.
critical thinking part is absolutely 100% critical for teachers and leaders to foster.
Absolutely. And what Michelle and Dr. Ament there and Arvin with ProSolve and all those guys are doing is great. And we'll put a link if you want to join the movement, if you want to lurk and join the LinkedIn group with us. Um, and just what's cool too, I like about it, Mark, is somebody like you and somebody like Dr. Ament, they're not like gatekeeping this stuff either, right? All the people that I've met in all the people that are doing the stuff, and I could offer a laundry list of names. If I reached out to a couple of my friends and said, "Hey, I need such and such," and they'd be like, "Yeah, I'm in. Whatever you want," right? And that's the kind of community that we need in our schools. And again, from a
I
small
agree.
town, that's easy to do in small town Western New York. In Miami, it might not be so easy, or in Broward
Understood.
County, or Orange County.
Yeah. But again, that's
So
something that you remember that some people forget is just
yeah.
how complex the whole system is. Like when we say ecosystem, it looks very different, and from school
Mhm.
district to school district.
Just
But yeah,
going back to walk down the hall and talk to somebody.
start a conversation. Yeah,
Exactly.
I had this thought because, just like teachers, administrators can be pulled
Hmm.
in so many different directions. And I'd say the majority of it does have to do with the compliance part. we got to do these fire drills, the critical incident drills. You got the harassment policies. You've got FERPA, you got this and that. So you're constantly bouncing off of ensuring that the school and every personnel is in compliance with that. But if we could somehow use AI to help us organize our day better for more human connection, to pave the way for more human connection, then it's up to us what we do with it. So that's why, I do feel hopeful that so much of let's be honest, the plate was overflowing 20 years ago. And every meeting that is had at a district office, the plate continues to overflow with more and more and more demands. And then with every policy that is passed and every statute, every mandate, if we can get to a place where AI is literally removing some items from the plate and giving us a little more time to reconnect with the humans in front of us, that's the best hope I feel about the kind of future that you and I see for our students and also for our teachers who deserve all the good in the world.
I think that's a great place to kind of finish this. I don't think we can build off of that. I mean, that's a great place to just kind of leave as a remembrance. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, connect with you, obviously we talked about the human intelligence movement and you're a player, you're a part there. Where else can they find you, Mark?
Yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with anyone interested in these topics that we've covered. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Mark Zeiler, LinkedIn.
I'll put the link in the show notes.
Connect. I'd love to connect with you and have a conversation.
Absolutely, Mark. Thanks for your time tonight. It was a pleasure. Again, we could talk for another.
Yeah, Dan, you and I are going to continue talking for years and years, but it's been a pleasure being on your podcast. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks, Mark. And we'll see you guys next time on the show.